everyone. I'm Lailani Gadia, and I'm the manager of ADOC, the Asian American Documentary Network. ADOC works to increase visibility and support of Asian Americans in the documentary field. We're so excited to be here today for one of several conversations between truth tellers and documentarians as part of our series where we're celebrating the record number of Asian American documentary filmmakers who are now awards contenders for this year's awards season. There are a record number of 17 features and 5 short documentaries from Asian American directors and or producers that have qualified for the Best Documentary Feature and the Best Documentary Short categories. So today, we're grateful to witness a conversation between two incredible storytellers, Ursula Liang with her powerful film, Down a Dark Stairwell, and Weegu with her eye-opening film, A Woman's Work, the NFL's Cheerleader Problem. So let's get started. Let's welcome Ursula Liang and Weegu to the Zoom stage. Welcome, Ursula and Wee. So great that you're both here for this conversation. We're all so proud of the work you're both continuing to do in the documentary space and telling stories that matter in your own ways. With that said, I'm going to turn the stage to you.
Thanks, Leilani.
Thank you.
Hi, Wee.
Hi, Ursula.
How are you doing over there?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Where are you dialing in from?
I'm dialing in from Little Tokyo, Los Angeles.
Nice.
How about you?
Bronx, New York, home of the Lenape people.
Yeah, I'm on the land of the Gabrielino and Tomba, I believe. Yeah. Do we want to describe ourselves or?
Oh yeah, we could do that. This is something that's happened over sort of the pandemic period as we got more conscious about accessibility. I am wearing glasses, sitting on my couch in my living room with a painting behind me, and I'm wearing a light blue shirt, long sleeve shirt, have long hair, bangs, and some pillows behind me.
I have black, short, curly hair, and I'm sitting in my office with a bunch of stuff behind me and wearing a light green shirt. No glasses. I don't actually need glasses. So that's about it.
You are like the rare person I know that doesn't need glasses. Like one of the things
I know
over the pandemic is that I am like really having trouble seeing because my eye doctor isn't open and I can't get a new prescription. So I'm like on and off glasses, like up here by the screen.
But you know, I've always had glasses envy because growing up, I grew up in Vancouver, Canada. It's like, 30% Asian or something. So my high school was mostly Asian. Everyone had glasses except for me. It's like an accessory. Like your glasses are super cool and fashionable. It's like a statement of who you are. Like, I don't get that.
Is your hair naturally curly? Because that's what I always wanted, the curly hair.
Oh yeah, it is naturally curly. But you know how much I was teased about that growing up? It was crazy. It was not like the grass is always greener, I guess. But like, going to the hairstylist, like the Asian hairstylist, never knew what to do with my hair. So it would always just turn into like a mushroom cut. Because it would just be like frizzy and like, they try to straighten it, but it would just be like frizzy coming out this way. So
I got that mushroom cut too. I think it happens no matter what kind of Asian hair you have. It just poofs up and they don't know what to do with it.
But I recently learned how to take care of my curls and like enhance, moisturize my curly hair. So I'm really grateful.
I'm sure this is what everybody tuned in for.
I know.
Panel discussion about
hair care.
Yeah. Exactly.
But I was always curious. So did you grow up in the Bronx or or in New York in general?
No, I've been here for almost 25 years, but I grew up in outside of Boston, Newton, Massachusetts, like a suburb of Boston, which was, being that this is an ADOC panel, it was not a very ADOC-y space. It was, I grew up in a white and culturally Jewish dominated neighborhood. And I think that's a lot of where, I think some of that, filters into the filmmaking that I do. There's this sort of feeling of being an other always. And,
of course.
And needing to sort of see the other and sort of build bridges. So I think that's been sort of a little bit of a theme within my work so far. What about you, Vancouver?
Yeah, so I was born in China, in Chongqing, which is in the sort of southwest. Hao Wu, another documentary filmmaker, is from the same area. So we actually speak the same dialect. So I speak Mandarin and then also my local Sichuan dialect. I grew up there, and then I immigrated to Vancouver, Canada when I was 7. So I grew up in Canada. I'm Canadian. I have a green card to live and work here. But that's another thing I was wanting to ask you, because I feel like from the outside looking in your career, I always feel like your films and your career path has been about like Asian American. You're an Asian American filmmaker, telling Asian American stories. And I was wondering if you've always embraced that, or that's something that you had to kind of find or grow into.
I definitely had to find it. I mean, I think I grew up in an era, when sort of other identity wasn't really well established. It was a sort of a black and white kind of binary. And I think that and I'm mixed race. My mom is from Germany and my dad is from China. And so I think that, I grew up also in a neighborhood that had a lot of like, ethnic white diversity too. So, I probably fell in the category of like Italian girl when I was growing up. And so it wasn't until I got to college when you sort of really have to start picking and choosing your friends rather than the ones that you're just given in elementary school that you just have to be friends with because there's only 12 kids. I started like feeling like I needed to self-define my identity at that point in a different way. And so I became an African American studies major instead. I don't know. I mean, my racial self-exploration was sort of an interesting process, but I think I did learn a lot sort of by watching and listening and learning about other cultures. And, ultimately I think there were points in time when I identified as more as, mixed race. And now I feel like I identify more as Asian American. And I think it took me moving to New York City and meeting people that were like me, not just had the same like racial background, but were, into the same things I was into, for me to like really feel like that's where I belonged. Like I moved to New York and I started working in the magazine industry. And so I joined the Asian American Journalists Association. And those were like, the Asians that I had met before were like a certain kind of Asian that didn't feel comfortable to me. But the ones that I had met at AAJ were like all really curious, all creative, like talkative and all full of personality and, just things that I gravitated towards. So I felt like I really fit in the pocket with that group. And then I felt like squarely like I belonged in that space. And I think the documentary world is like a real extension of that. Like, I don't know, there's something that we share in terms of like a different culture that's not really attached to our race, but that sort of like personality culture feels really comfortable for me.
Yeah. Personality, values, like interests.
Social justice and, ethical behavior, like that's not every community has that. And our special little like corner of the world in ADOC, like there's so many people that fit in that space.
Yeah, I just feel like for me, just growing up in Canada, in the time that I grew up there, it's always about multiculturalism. Like that was kind of the propaganda, I guess, of Canadian culture, was like pluralism, multiculturalism. We had like multicultural day at school where you can dress in your like outfits and like
we had color wars at my school. It was color wars, which is very different than what you get.
Yeah, it feels so different. But like I think growing up, I was always like, I'm Chinese Canadian. Like that hyphenated identity, like from when I was like 8 years old or something, because they kind of teach it to you in school. They're like, what are you? Like, what do you? And then I'm like, yeah, I'm Chinese Canadian, that's my thing. But like having now moved to America, I've lived here for, 10 years. It's weird. It's still weird to me to say I'm Asian American, even though it's something that I feel like I've totally grown into more and more. But it's that identity of American is very weird. Because I think growing up in Canada, people are like, "Oh, Americans!" Like it means something. It means something that
a lot meaner than you are. You're the Canadians are much jollier folks. Actually, I made my first film. I spent a lot of time in Canada. My first film, 9 Man. It was about a sport that takes place in Chinatown and connects all the major Chinatowns in North America. And so I went up to Canada a lot, and it was really like the film is a like exploration of like race and masculinity and sort of historic discrimination against Asian American men. And when I got to Canada, I was really trying to decipher if the feelings and like attitudes about race were the same. And I feel like it was really complicated because I was mostly filming in Toronto and Montreal. And while I think like on the surface, there is like really this much more like multicultural, like we all get along kind of attitude, but historically there are the same racist laws that were in place that banned Asians from doing all kinds of things.
Exclusion,
and I think that the undercurrent of all that, whether people sort of feel much more, much more united, I think it's still there. And so I felt like it was interesting to parse out as I
it's definitely still there. And the thing is, because of that multiculturalism thing, I feel like people don't talk about race as much. It's not part of the conversation as much. And now when I go back to Canada, you see how also it has been detrimental to communities, because it is very much like that thinking of, oh, we're a mosaic, but that means we're staying in our own little space, right? You're your own little tile on this mosaic, and you don't really bleed out. But people say, like, America, it's a melting pot. And if you really think about what that means, you're literally being fucking melted. Okay? Like, that's what it feels like sometimes. It really is, right? It's like that pressure, that extreme environment, right? That you have to kind of like survive in. And so I think in terms of Asian Americans, that's definitely has a different feeling, especially when talking to Asian Americans here. But in terms of your first film, it was all about Asian American men, as you said, and also basketball, right?
Not basketball, 9-man.
9-man. And so sports. Yeah. So like, and then the first film that I co-directed, first feature, who is Arthur Chu, is also about this Asian American male Jeopardy champion. So in some ways it's kind of similar. Like, although Jeopardy is not technically a sport, but it's like that competition. It's dealing with masculinity, gender, and all these things. So. Yeah, no,
I film, and I remember I always feel this about your films, that when I hear what you're doing, I'm like, I wish I had thought to make that film. Like, that's how I feel about every film that you're making. Like, you have like a great,
that's
like
hilarious.
You're great at picking stories. So I thought that was you've made some really smart decisions in what you're choosing to dedicate your career towards. And how do you make those decisions? Like, are you just like waiting for the first film to be funded? Or, I think all of us know how much work it takes to make a film, but when we're especially working in this Asian American space where our films are not valued in the same way and not funded in the same way, like, you have to make a lot of financial and physical sacrifice. Like, what does it for you, and how did you choose the films that you've been making?
Well, it's weird. I feel like for me, and this is kind of maybe corny, but it kind of has to do with like just chance and destiny in some way.
Oh, I would say, this is like Chinese cultural thread. I don't know.
Yeah, like yuanfin, the concept of yuanfin in Chinese is just like destiny. And like, so like my when I went to USC and I was trying to actually do a lot of fiction film. I really love still fiction and writing and stuff. And so for my thesis film, I actually wrote a short fictional film that I wanted to shoot in Chongqing, in my the place where I grew up in China. And unfortunately, it got shut down by the government after 2 days of production there. So I didn't have a film. So I had to come back. And I was in China for like 9 months or something preparing. So I was shooting stuff all the time, like documentary stuff, whatever I felt like. So the story is based on my childhood of growing up, in the 80s in China during the student democracy movement. And it's just about a little girl kind of like realizing the power of her imagination during this tumultuous time, like as a backdrop. So, that was not okay. Like, we did a lot of precautions to, try to do it on, under the radar and everything. But unfortunately, something happened, whatever it is, we got shut down. So I came back to LA and didn't have a film, but I had all this footage I was shooting, and also like a little bit of the fiction footage. So I was like, okay, I need to make this in a documentary. So that just became this kind of like hybrid documentary of that experience. And then from there, it really kind of pushed me into like the documentary direction. And, I had professors at USC who was like, okay, maybe you can help, be an assistant editor on this documentary. And I just got to know like more and more people sort of in the doc world working on stories. And I was like, this is amazing. I interned at Sundance and like watched so many documentaries, that are happening and being produced. And I just felt like there was a magic there, of something, all these storytellers trying to interpret and re-envision what's going on, like the zeitgeist, and also looking at, the future, like how can we be as a civilization, So I was just drawn to that. And then for Who is Arthur Chu, it was random because my co-director, Scott, he approached me with this story after seeing my thesis film. And he was like, I reached out to Arthur already. He's interested in being a part of this film. Do you want to start, just trying to make it? And I was like, okay. Like, this guy seems really interesting. I was really drawn to his writing. I don't know if you read Your Princess is in Another Castle. That was one article Arthur wrote that was like, this guy is super interesting. He's not the typical hero. He's not the typical he's this Asian American that's now super successful and everyone wants to be like him, and all these things. There's part of that is true, but the other part is he has this dark underpinning, and he's still trying to figure it out. So that was something.
I appreciate that you're interested in the anti-hero, because I think that too many people in our community are still at sort of 101 of representation, where they want to see a perfect image on camera. And I mean, the ultimate is to have a male romantic lead with muscles, that I feel that's sort of our community as the thrust of our community is fighting for in worlds of representation. And I try to tell my characters or my subjects this when I film them, that I come from a journalism world, and that I'm interested in really authentic portraits, and also that audiences always love the flawed character the most. They always do. And it's to know, I don't know why anyone wants to present a perfect image of anything on camera, but I think that our community tends to trend towards that.
But I think it's a real pressure, though. I think it's, like you said, people in the general common sense knowledge, people like flawed characters, right? But after making Who is Arthur Chu and, taking it out on the festival circuit, trying to get distribution for it, you realize, if they're white, if they're maybe a white male, that's the most oh, you're so flawed and so complicated. Amazing. Okay, with Arthur Chu, you don't know how many reviews we read where literally the reviewer was just reacting personally to Arthur and saying I don't like him, I don't like his personality, and just this lack of and someone even wrote this people, I don't know if you've heard of this podcast called El Trapo Trap House or whatever it's called, but it's some kind of popular podcast that I've never heard of before. But they once were enemies of Arthur on the internet, but they saw the documentary, and then their whole interpretation of it was wow, these filmmakers really were hard, trolling Arthur in a sense of just making this documentary as a takedown to him because it was so negative or something in terms of the portrayal. And to me, I was just are you kidding me? How much empathy do you lack to be able to just write off the whole film as that, And so I think it's just it's still really difficult, but I think it's worthwhile to try to do is to, try to make these complicated stories and characters, because it's going to be pushing that envelope, and it's going to be training audiences to see something else other than the muscular romantic lead, which is great, but we need a whole plethora of different things. We because we're in that environment of narrative scarcity. And I think it's amazing what you're doing with your most recent film as well, especially looking at the intersection of the Asian American community and other communities of color. I think that conversation is so amazing and so important to have, and we didn't have that before. I think it's, again, I applaud you for taking that on.
I actually, the film for folks are watching is about a Chinese American police officer killing an African American man in the stairwell of a housing project in Brooklyn, and the case and the activism that swells up out of that incident. And I will say that people within our community actually were not very supportive of the film when I started, because, even folks in the film space, I have some influential people in the Asian American film space tell me that they didn't really want to see that film because they're concerned about the fact that it would undo a lot of the, the racial justice work that Black folks and Asian folks have done in solidarity over the years. But I think it's really really to show what's happening and what's at risk if we don't talk about these things. So, I guess that was really deflating for me to not have people pointedly tell me they weren't supporting the film. But And it's actually really hard to make a film that not everybody's going to like. And
Yes.
I'm a person that really likes to be liked, as an outsider, like mixed race kid, anytime you can have like acceptance or like love from people, you're all for it. But I think that was like the hardest part of making the film is having to deal with subjects and community members that weren't going to necessarily like everything I was doing, and knowing that I was going to have to, for the life of the film, I was going to have to absorb some of that. So, I mean, I appreciate you talking about the, negative reviews or the things that people said in reviews that you didn't, that kind of were hurtful. And I'm curious how I think if you get to a certain level of fame, Brad Pitt fame, you stop reading all that stuff because you've got enough coverage. But when you're at our level, you read every little like Google alert that you get. And so I'm assuming you're reading everything. How do you sort of like walk through that emotionally, personally? So that you can
it's so difficult. It's so difficult. I mean, actually now, like for my current film, A Woman's Work, I try not to read everything. Like right now, my publicist is sending me daily emails of like, oh, online coverage. I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna read this thing that, like, they tell you if it's positive, mixed positive, or negative. So
trigger alert.
Yeah, I'm just choosing the ones. And then also I have my my social media manager. I'm like, okay, can you read some of this too? So let me know if it's worth reading, But for Who Is Arthur Chu, we were reading everything, and it was like super hard. It was just like, you can't help but let it kind of take your faith away from humanity, like your faith in humanity. It kind of like takes that away a little bit, because obviously every filmmaker's goal when you make a film is for people to see it and for people to gain understanding, right? Like whether it's of the story or the characters or whatever it is. And when you see people react in these ways that seem so narrow-minded or ignorant, it's just kind of sad. But at the same time, I really learned to kind of process it mentally inside, to just try to see where they're coming from and what is the bias, like where is that bias that they're speaking from, and what is that experience they're speaking from. And so that I'm trying to like make it into a learning thing where I'm like learning, okay, so this person, it's coming from this place, and this is why. And so when I talk about the film, or I talk about the film to other people, whatever, then I can draw upon that and discuss that and kind of like unravel and unpack that kind of bias, right? And that's the same thing for A Woman's Work, where like you said, it was so difficult for you to get people to support in terms of wanting to see the story. Apparently everybody fucking hates cheerleaders, or they think that it's like an immoral thing to do. They never want their daughters to do it or whatever, or they're like, who cares, they're just going to become Sports Illustrated models when they after they're done, which is exactly what an industry member said to us, like when we're doing pitch meetings. Like it was just so much of this stuff, and you're just like, what?
I used to work at my early career. I worked at ESPN, the magazine, so I was like very deep in the sports world. And your film, which is about NFL cheerleaders bringing a lawsuit against their teams, or I can't remember now. I saw it at a Tribeca premiere, which was super exciting.
Thank you.
And I think you were wearing the same top, by the way, and you had these like incredible jade nails that I remember. And like,
oh, you were talking about the jade nails.
I was all about like your representation, like in subtle ways that day. But
I like color, like this color, green color.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a good color. Actually, I'm wearing a color that I discovered is really good for Asian people too. When we were filming 9 Man, like I realized that all the guys were somehow, when they were showing up for interviews, they were all wearing like light blue shirts, and they all looked really good. It's like a good color for our skin tone. And so I ended up making merch for that film, and I made light blue shirts, which I think look good on everybody. So anyway, so I mean, I worked in this world of sports, and this was like before like really the internet troll world took off, but there is so much like anti-woman behavior in the sports world that I can't imagine the kind of trolling that your film is getting. Well, I think it's like, if people watch the film, they're really like having a lot of empathy for, the legal and like real ethical struggles that these women are going through. I'm imagining that sexism in America is really like rearing its head around your film.
Yeah, and it's also just, in the film industry, obviously, as we've seen like Me Too movement happen and everything, like that kind of reckoning. And it was like when I started this in 2014, actually, at the same time as I started Who is Arthur Chu, and that was totally before me too. And then it was just like afterwards, you felt like a shift or of people like being more willing to just listen and just be like, oh, okay, interesting. And that's something I didn't consider before. And I think that's something that I feel like is really rewarding to hear, especially now as the film is out there. Like the film was reviewed on NPR's Film Week, which I didn't know what that was until I heard about it. But the reviewer, the critic, she was like, there was a question in the film that was like, can cheerleaders really be feminists? And after I finished watching it, I realized, yes, they can. And I'm like, cool. Like, that's such a small thing, but it's like really satisfying to me, because it's just like opening up like people's imaginations of what can exist in the world, right? And I just feel like I don't know, that's something that was super satisfying to me. But yeah, it was really definitely awkward many times trying to make this film and talking to people about it, but because it took so long to make it, I feel like, again, just the practice of it just made me more like fortified and confident. But I can't tell you how many stereotypes and things I had to kind of work through, and like other people's shit, that I had to like process in order to like finish the film, to talk about it, in terms of feedback and all these things. But I mean, I'm sure you also experienced that in the finishing of your film. And we actually were in ITVS open call, same cohort.
You and I sat in a very cold, dark room for a week together, as we were being supported by PBS funding and had to get onboarded into the PBS system. That was fun.
Yeah.
It's a great, I gotta say, like, I try to talk, like, big up PBS anytime I can, because I feel like they really did me right with this film. They came on really early to support me in development when even more obvious sources of funding were not willing to support me. And I had like a really bad like teaser, but I think they had enough faith. And I think it's really important nowadays that people are putting money into in at development stages where you're not quite able to demonstrate the story, but you really need the funding to like get there. And it really just took like somebody, someone on staff had known my previous film. Some good people were in the room when they were reading the applications. And I, just had some folks there thought that I could do it, even though I'm sure my application was pretty messy. Yeah. And that, like, just having that kind of like latitude is really important. And I think it's the latitude that, white male filmmakers get all the time. But I was lucky enough to get through PBS. So I'm, despite all the paperwork, I'm a huge champion of the system.
I think same for this project, like I got DDF. That was the Diversity Development Fund. That was the first money into the film, you know. And that was when Nigel Eaton was still at ITVS, and she was, sort of in charge of that. And I feel like when you have people that really put their belief in you at that early stage, it just means so much. And
I would shout out Monica Navarro then, because I feel like Monica in that moment for me.
And she was actually our consulting producer at ITVS too. Oh, nice. She was there. So yeah, just like the people, it's just so important to also see that you need diversity in the institutions that are supporting films and filmmakers, right? And I think actually we're also in the independent directors group together, right? And like that, we're talking about mental health and documentary directing, and I feel like just thinking about it now is so important to be able to have that support of your community, that affirmation, the constructive feedback. That whole support system is what's going to allow you to succeed and to keep making work, right? Yeah. And, for us as women of color filmmakers, that's not something that is readily out there necessarily, right? And you compare that, like, oh, how come that white male filmmaker can get to make a film every year, like keep making stuff, like continues, because like he has the people that believes in him and that system. So yeah. I mean, of course, everyone has their own talent, but you know what I mean, like all things being equal.
I feel like I need to shout out Shauna Swanson too, who's my supervising producer, who's a Black woman at ITVS. And now that we're listing all these names off, I'm realizing we're listing women of color, and like the importance of having like women of color in those positions at PBS, which they are not at other organizations, means that we had this like emotional and financial support that we wouldn't have had at some other places, or we didn't get from other places because we asked them for it and they didn't give it to us. But I also wanted to ask you, because you did a cut down for PBS, right? So I saw your feature length version, which I'm sure was like an hour and a half or something like that, and you had to get down to an hour for PBS, and I want to know about that torture too, like what it's like, how you went through that, and what it was like for you to.
Yeah, it was tough. I think I could have, like, I think we could have just planned it a little bit better, or just kind of did it more systematically or something. But we were supposed to do the cut down, but because, and also you're getting ready for your festival launch, right? You're getting ready for the festival cut, and so that just takes up so much effort and time, and that's like everybody all hands on deck in terms of your team putting that out there. And then it's like, oh wait, and then we have to do this cut down, right? But so I ended up having to do essentially most of the editing on the cut down. But honestly, in the end, I feel like it was a good process, just because it was just another version of the film that I got to like discover, like different pockets or something of the film that I got to shape and whittle down and create this other thing. And then it added like new meaning to how I thought about the film,
Did you add anything in when you did the cut?
I did, actually. Okay, I did. Yeah, it was like, it's kind of funny, but yes, there are some things I did add that I felt like, oh, so it was this, second chance in a way to just like do a little bit to kind of enhance certain things. But I thought creatively it was rewarding in the end. The thing that was difficult was just the timing, because, my film, it premiered at Tribeca in 2019. And then only now, like January 4th, did it premiere the hour long on PBS. And then we just had our launch on VOD and digital. So it took a while, right? And actually it was after talking to you, Ursula, when I even thought about the whole like awards thing, where you're like, oh, by the way, you should like enter into there. You like sent me a list of things. I'm like, oh, okay. I didn't really do anything, but like the only thing that I tried to look into was this Academy Awards thing, because someone else told me that they changed all the rules and it was, fairly straightforward. So it was like, oh yeah, I should look into that. And it wasn't that difficult.
How proud are your parents that you're like qualified and in the Academy screening room?
I don't think I didn't tell them yet.
Tell them before you like lose the award and you're not the winner in April. You gotta tell them you had a success. Yeah, it's just like we're in this like funny moment where there's so many people qualified, and the next cut down gets done, is the nomination stage. And I'm like, we only hold this title of qualified for Academy Awards for a short period of time before it becomes
I feel like somehow just sometimes I have a tendency to downplay certain things that are actually accomplishments, and
very Chinese, very Chinese.
I know it's bad though. It's bad. Like I should, be celebrating like in the moment, but sometimes I'm like, oh, like maybe because it was so straightforward to like enter that I was like, oh, okay, it's not, it's not a big deal, like whatever.
I think this is an interesting personality quality that we have to navigate. I think as individuals who have this kind of quality, but also I think as a community, I think a lot of us have this sort of like don't brag kind of value. And what I've tried to do to conquer that, because actually I had a really interesting conversation with Tom Powers one time, and this is what made me change my mindset on it. Because Tom is like a great person I've learned, I've met over the years. I really developed a relationship with him when he did the Stranger Than Fiction series at the IFC. And, of course, he's a programmer at all these important festivals. But I had, over the years, I was making my first film, and I sheepishly wanted to show it to him, like a little bit before it was done, but knew how busy he was, et cetera. Didn't want to bother him. But he was also programming in Canada. So I had a film that had these, Nine Man had these Canadian and American elements. And I sort of also, before I finished, wanted some advice on whether there were things that I should be paying attention to for Canadian market. Anyway, he was like, I'll watch it. He was like, just keep reminding me, and I'll, because I have a large pile of things to do, and I will watch it at some point. And, but I had, casually talked to him about it over the over the years. And when he finally watched it, he wrote me and he was like, I'm surprised at how good the film is, because you've been saying for so many years, you know, like all these things that were like couching it, you know, like, oh, I'm a first time filmmaker. It's not, you know, it's not going to be that good. Oh, it's a rough cut, blah, blah, blah. And I was doing all these things that to him were devaluing the film. And so just the way that he said that, like, I'm surprised that it was good, made me realize that I actually have to reframe. And even if it's hard for me to talk about in my own work, you finish a film and you hate everything about it. I don't know how you are. I still hate everything about everything I've done. Like, I think it could be better. And that's part of what drives me to be better. But I realized that we really have to talk about ourselves, particularly as women, particularly as Asian Americans, in different ways. And so the way I'm trying to solve that problem is to think about my subjects and the topics in my film, because I think I can talk about other people in these glowing ways without talking about my own work and my own process in glowing ways. And so I try to say that these are like, I might have a terrible film and it's a rough cut or whatever, but the characters in it are amazing. They're so interesting. They're so fascinating. And so that's my solution now. So
I think it's also just practice, and it's also just having people ask you about it. You know what I mean? If no one freaking asks you about something, sometimes you don't know how to articulate it. You're like, what? But now, like having this conversation or just being interviewed for press and things, it's just like constant practice of like, okay, now I have to think about it in this way, and I have to talk about myself and why I made these choices as director, my vision, and also just even making the films, having to get funding and having to pitch it over and over again. Especially I think for a woman's work, because it's about this, football. It's America's favorite pastime. Is these cheerleaders. The two women in my film are these white women, and it's like overwhelmingly this white male institution that I'm dealing with. And then, for me, I'm Asian American woman. My producing partner Elizabeth, also Asian American woman. It's like we're just constantly being kind of second guessed and challenged. Like, are you sure you want to make this movie? Like, are you, you know what I mean? Like, why are you making this movie? Like, that's a constant thing that we have to face. And so just, having been confronted with that, it's like, okay, now we have to like adapt and just really, just rise to the occasion. Right. And I think that's been a really great chance and opportunity to do that. But it's definitely something that you had to practice.
Well, that we're good at practicing, right? Did you play violin or anything like that? Practice?
No, I played the alto saxophone because my dad's friend gave me like a Miles Davis CD when I was young, and I thought he was playing the saxophone, but actually he's playing the trumpet. So I didn't know that it was the trumpet. But I was like, I love jazz. The sound is amazing. But then I took up saxophone. But did you do sports when you were young? Like, that's another question I had, because your film and you're interested in sports and sports stuff.
That was like, I think one of the most important things I did as a girl growing up to build my self-confidence and make me eat like a normal human being and not care about like body image in the same way. I played volleyball, I ran track, I played basketball, I did lacrosse. I was like a goalie in lacrosse. That was a terrible job, but I really like sports. And I grew up with, that was one of the things I did with my Chinese American dad is we watched, I grew up in Boston. We watched like the Celtics growing up, and he would take me to games where we'd watch together. And so his way of expressing Americanness was really like to participate in sort of the sports fandom world and to go in the backyard and play with us. So
that's funny. Yeah, my dad also, I also had that basketball connection with my dad, because he's like 6 feet tall, so which is kind of tall for someone like a Chinese man from the South. And he played basketball like when he was young or whatever. He played for like the city team, and so that's how he kind of became popular with women, I guess. And like my mom met him through that. So he wasn't allowed to play like in the city finals because of my grandfather's like bad political background. Because in China at that time, like it was all about that. So he was like, he had this chip on his shoulder. So when we moved to Canada, he was like, "You're playing basketball. You're gonna like go to basketball camp." And I was like, I'm not an athlete at all. Like, but I was like, oh yeah, I liked it. It was fun. But I was like a bench warmer playing basketball.
You can play basketball next time then.
You probably were way better than me.
There's definitely like a documentary basketball league about to be put together. I know Nadia Malgren plays basketball. There's a whole bunch of folks. So I would love to see this girl doc basketball game come together at some point and break all the break all the rules and let us vent our poor review angst on the court. I think we're supposed to wrap up soon. So
yeah. I was just gonna say though, I feel like we're both, you know, in terms of subject matter, like the masculinity thing, like sports, but we're coming at it from a very you know, different perspective, that we're linking like all these kind of like cultural, like racial things to the subject matter that seems, you know, prior to be these mainstream things, or like, you know, that's divorced from all these, you know, political and cultural discourse, but we're really kind of bringing that in and like dirtying that in a way, which I think is really great. And I think more of that needs to happen. And I also just think, like, as Asian American women, we need to be like recognized for that perspective that we bring, right? Like that lens that we bring onto certain subject matters. So, you know, if we want to make a film about Asian Americans or not, or just totally something else, like that can be something that can be acknowledged and be seen. I think that would be amazing. I think we're part of that.
Well, this makes me think we should work together on something in the future. So when COVID is over, we'll find a way to meet in person, and I'm ready to collaborate on something. I'm looking forward to like seeing what you're working on next, and to seeing you in person again.
I know. But we've been fortunate to see each other on the virtual space, you know, for all these different communities that we have. So that's been good. But yeah, definitely hope to hang out together in New York, eat some dim sum or something.
Oh my God, what are we doing for Chinese New Year? I don't know.
Yeah, it's Chinese New Year coming up.
I know.
Damn, I almost forgot.
Well, happy year of the
Ox,
everybody.
Okay, awesome. This was fun. Thank you.